The smartest child in the room isn't always the one raising his hand. Sometimes he's the one everyone is trying to throw out. The auditorium at Jefferson Academy was filled beyond capacity. Every seat was taken. Parents lined the side walls. Teachers stood near the exits. The bright lights hanging above the stage washed the room in a cold glow, while hundreds of quiet conversations blended into a restless hum. At the center of it all sat a 10-year-old boy in a navy sweater, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Ethan Brooks didn't look nervous. He didn't fidget. He didn't glance around the room, searching for comfort. He simply stared ahead at the large projection screen hanging above the stage. Beside him, his mother sat perfectly still. Amara Brooks pressed a thin folder against her chest. The edges dug into her fingers, but she barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on the long table where members of the school board sat in dark suits and serious expressions. She had worked 2 jobs for years to keep her son enrolled at Jefferson Academy. She had skipped vacations, delayed repairs on her apartment, and sacrificed countless comforts so Ethan could attend a school that promised opportunity. Now that same school was preparing to take everything away. The microphone crackled softly as Principal Richard Hale stood and adjusted his tie. The room slowly quieted. "Thank you all for attending," he said. "Today we are here to address a matter involving student conduct and unauthorized access to protected school systems." A ripple moved through the crowd. Parents exchanged glances. Some already knew the rumors. Others had come hoping to hear them confirmed. Amara felt every eye drifting toward her son. She kept her chin high. Over the years she had grown accustomed to judgment. People always seemed to have an opinion about a black woman raising a child alone. They rarely offered help. They offered assumptions instead. Principal Hale clicked a remote. Ethan's student photograph appeared on the giant screen. The whispering grew louder. After a thorough internal review, Hale continued. "The administration has determined that Ethan Brooks accessed restricted portions of the school network without authorization." The words landed heavily across the auditorium. Several parents nodded immediately. Others frowned. Ethan remained motionless. Hale continued reading from prepared notes. "Such actions represent a serious violation of school policy. Therefore, the board has recommended permanent expulsion effective immediately." A collective gasp swept through the room. Amara felt her stomach tighten. Even though she had known this moment was coming, hearing the words spoken publicly felt different. Colder. Crueler. She looked toward her son. She expected disappointment. Maybe sadness. Maybe fear. Instead, Ethan smiled. It wasn't a rebellious smile. It wasn't arrogant. It was small, calm, almost curious. Principal Hale paused. "Ethan," he said, lowering the paper in his hand, "before the board finalizes its decision, do you have anything you'd like to say?" The room fell completely silent. Somewhere near the back, a chair squeaked against the floor. Ethan slowly stood. The bright stage lights reflected in his dark eyes. For a brief moment, he looked impossibly young. Just a boy surrounded by adults who had already decided who he was. Amara held her breath. Ethan looked at the principal, then at the board, then at the crowd filling every seat in the auditorium. His smile widened slightly. "If you're going to remove me," he said softly, "then maybe everyone deserves to see what I found first." The silence that followed felt heavier than any applause. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small flash drive. And for the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared on the faces of the adults who thought they were in control. Ethan held the flash drive between 2 fingers as if it weighed nothing, but the reaction it triggered was immediate. Principal Hale stared at the small device, his expression tightening. Members of the school board exchanged uncertain looks. Parents who had arrived expecting a routine disciplinary hearing suddenly leaned forward in their seats. The atmosphere in the auditorium shifted. The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier began to crack. Amara felt it too. She had seen that look in her son's eyes before. It was the same look he wore whenever he solved a problem everyone else believed was impossible. Principal Hale cleared his throat. "Ethan, this is not the appropriate time for games." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I am not playing a game, sir." His voice remained calm. "You said I accessed the school network. That is true, but nobody asked why." Silence followed. The giant screen behind the stage still displayed Ethan's student photograph. Under the bright lights, the image now seemed strangely out of place. Ethan walked toward the presentation computer position near the podium. Several board members immediately shifted in their seats. One administrator stood, as if prepared to intervene. "You are not authorized to use that equipment," Hale said sharply. Ethan stopped. "Then someone else can open the file." He extended the flash drive toward the nearest board member. "Everything is already there." The room held its breath. Finally, Dr. Linda Carson, the oldest member of the board, reached for the drive. Her silver-framed glasses caught the light as she examined Ethan carefully. "Let us see what he wants to show us," she said. A few moments later, the flash drive appeared on the projector screen. The first file opened. Rows of numbers filled the display. Spreadsheets, financial reports, transfer logs, dates, account references. The audience looked confused almost immediately. Several parents frowned. Others appeared disappointed. This was not the dramatic confession they expected. Principal Hale folded his arms. "What exactly are we looking at?" Ethan turned toward the screen. "The reason I entered the network." The auditorium remained silent. 3 months ago, Ethan continued, "I noticed something strange in the scholarship reports posted on the school website." He pointed toward a section of highlighted figures. The totals did not match. A few people laughed quietly. One parent shook his head. "The totals were off by less than 1%. Ethan continued. "Most people would never notice." The laughter stopped. Dr. Carson adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the screen. Ethan walked slowly across the stage. "I thought it was a mistake. Then I checked the public records. The numbers did not match there either." Amara watched her son carefully. The confidence in his voice did not come from arrogance. It came from certainty. He was simply explaining what he had seen. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ethan clicked to the next slide. A complex flowchart appeared. Colored lines connected dozens of accounts and organizations. Audible murmurs spread through the crowd. The missing money moved through 4 separate foundations before disappearing. Principal Hale's face lost color. "What money?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked directly at him. "The scholarship money." The room froze. Several board members immediately turned toward one another. Dr. Carson narrowed her eyes. "How much money are we talking about?" Ethan glanced at the screen. $6.8 million. The number landed like a stone dropped into still water. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Parents sat upright. Teachers exchanged alarmed looks. Even the reporters standing near the back entrance began pulling out their phones. Amara felt her pulse quicken. $6.8 million. She had no idea what Ethan was about to reveal, but for the first time all morning, nobody was thinking about expelling him anymore. The number seemed to linger in the air long after Ethan spoke it. $6.8 million. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the usual sounds of an auditorium had disappeared. Principal Hale stood frozen beside the podium, his fingers gripping the edge so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. Dr. Carson slowly removed her glasses and stared at the screen again. "That is a very serious accusation," she said carefully. Ethan nodded. "That is why I checked it 6 times before saying anything." A few uneasy chuckles surfaced in the crowd, but they vanished almost immediately. Ethan clicked to the next slide. More spreadsheets appeared. More account numbers. More dates. The complexity alone was enough to overwhelm most adults in the room. Yet Ethan navigated through the information as if he were explaining a simple homework assignment. The scholarship fund received donations from several organizations, he said. Most of the transfers are normal, but every year, around the same week, a percentage of the money follows a different path. Colored lines illuminated across the screen. The audience watched the trail move from one foundation to another, then another, then another. Finally, the line ended at a single account. A parent near the front row frowned. How did a 10-year-old even find this? Nobody answered. Ethan simply continued. The transfers were small enough to avoid attention individually, but when combined over 9 years, they equal $6.8 million. Amara could feel the room changing around her. The people who had spent the last hour viewing her son as a troublemaker were now looking at him differently. Not as a child, not even as a student. They were looking at him as someone holding answers they did not have. Dr. Carson leaned toward the microphone. "Ethan, where does the money end up?" For the first time, Ethan hesitated. Not from fear, from caution. He glanced at the screen before answering. That is where things became strange. He clicked again. The final flow chart appeared. Unlike the others, this one contained a name. a single name sitting at the center of the entire network. The auditorium grew quiet once more. Several board members immediately recognized it. So did many parents. The reporters near the back straightened. Cameras were quietly lifted. Principal Hale's face tightened. "No," he whispered under his breath. Amara followed his gaze toward the screen. The name meant nothing to her at first. Then her stomach dropped. She had not spoken those words aloud in nearly 11 years. She had trained herself not to. She had built an entire life around forgetting them. Yet there they were, glowing across a screen in front of hundreds of people. Sterling Foundation. A murmur rolled through the auditorium. The reaction spread like a wave. Sterling Foundation was not a small organization. It was one of the largest educational charities in the country. Its scholarships helped thousands of students every year. Its founder appeared regularly on magazine covers and television interviews. Dr. Carson stared at the screen. "You are saying these transactions lead here?" Ethan nodded. "Every path eventually leads there." Principal Hale immediately stepped forward. "This presentation is over." His voice came sharper than intended. Several heads turned toward him. Ethan remained calm. "Why?" Hale opened his mouth, but no answer came. The room noticed. Reporters noticed too. The sudden urgency only made the information feel more important. Ethan looked toward the audience. "I am not saying the foundation stole the money," he said. "I am saying the numbers point there." The distinction mattered. It was careful, precise, honest. Yet somehow it made the silence even heavier. Because everyone understood what came next. If the numbers truly pointed toward Sterling Foundation, then sooner or later they would point toward the man who built it. And for reasons Amara could not explain, hearing that name again after all these years felt less like a coincidence and more like the beginning of something she had spent a decade trying to leave behind. For a moment, the auditorium disappeared. The voices, the lights, the hundreds of people watching from their seats all seemed to fade into the background as Amara stared at the name glowing on the screen. Sterling Foundation. 11 years ago, Nathan Sterling had been nothing like the man the world knew now. Back then, he was ambitious, brilliant, and hungry to prove himself. He was building software from a rented office above a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. The company had only 6 employees. The furniture did not match. The air conditioning barely worked. Yet every time he spoke about the future, people listened. Amara had listened too. She met him during a technology conference when she was 23 years old and finishing a graduate internship in data analytics. While everyone else crowded around executives and investors, Nathan stood alone near a presentation board covered in sketches and projections. He talked about ideas instead of money. He talked about building something that could help schools and communities. He talked about creating opportunities for children who were often overlooked. Amara remembered how easy it had been to believe him. Their relationship had not begun with luxury dinners or private flights. It had begun with long walks after work, late-night conversations, and shared dreams that felt larger than either of them. For 2 years they built a life together. Nothing extravagant, just hope. Then everything changed. Nathan's company exploded almost overnight. Investors arrived. Interviews followed. New offices opened. The pressure became constant. Every day seemed to pull him further into a world that demanded more of his time, more of his attention, and eventually more of his loyalty. At first he promised nothing would change. Then meetings replaced dinners. Business trips replaced weekends. Phone calls became shorter. The distance grew quietly. Not through anger, through absence. The last conversation Amara remembered clearly happened on a rainy October evening. Nathan stood beside his car outside her apartment building. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. Like success had arrived carrying a weight neither of them expected. He told her he needed time. He told her investors were pushing him in different directions. He told her he had to focus completely on the company. Amara remembered waiting for him to say he would come back. He never did. A week later his phone number changed. His email stopped working. Every connection disappeared. She wrote letters. She received no response. She visited his old office. The company had already moved. By the time she discovered she was pregnant, Nathan Sterling had become unreachable. The world saw a rising entrepreneur. Amara saw an empty apartment and a future she would have to build alone. She never chased headlines. She never contacted reporters. She never tried to force her way into his life. Instead, she chose dignity. She worked. She studied. She raised Ethan. Every achievement her son earned came from sacrifices nobody applauded. Every bill paid, every school application submitted, every late night spent helping him learn came from her determination to keep moving forward. Now, sitting in the auditorium years later, she watched the name she had spent a decade avoiding dominate a giant screen. The strange part was not seeing it again. The strange part was realizing her son had found it without ever knowing why it mattered to her. Across the room, reporters were already typing messages into their phones. Board members whispered urgently among themselves. Ethan stood alone beneath the bright lights, calm as ever. And for the first time since the presentation began, Amara felt something she had not expected. Not fear, not anger. A quiet certainty that whatever happened next was about to change far more than a school disciplinary hearing. The whispers spreading through the auditorium grew louder with every passing second. Reporters moved closer to the stage. Parents checked their phones. Several teachers exchanged nervous glances as messages began appearing across social media. What had started as a disciplinary hearing was quickly becoming something much bigger. Principal Hale stepped toward the microphone again, visibly struggling to regain control of the room. "This meeting is adjourned," he announced. "The board will review this information privately." Before he could step away, Ethan spoke. Why review it privately? The question was not disrespectful. It was genuine, honest. The simplicity of it made the room even quieter. Hale looked at him. "Because these matters require professional investigation." Ethan nodded slowly. "That is exactly why I brought it here." Several people in the audience shifted in their seats. Dr. Carson leaned forward with interest. Ethan continued. "If I had emailed the report, nobody would have looked at it. If I had submitted a complaint, it would have disappeared into paperwork. Everyone only paid attention after deciding to expel me. No one challenged him because everyone knew he was right." Amara watched her son carefully. She could see the same determination that had carried him through years of misunderstanding. Since kindergarten, teachers had complained that he asked too many questions. By third grade, administrators had accused him of being disruptive because he finished assignments too quickly and then pointed out mistakes in textbooks. Most adults interpreted his curiosity as defiance. Very few took the time to understand it. Dr. Carson cleared her throat. "Ethan, when did you first discover the connection?" Ethan glanced at the screen. 8 weeks ago." A wave of surprise moved through the room. 8 weeks, she repeated. Ethan nodded. "I kept checking because I thought I had made a mistake." "And did you tell anyone?" she asked. 3 people. "Who?" Ethan pointed toward the faculty section. "My math teacher, the technology coordinator, and assistant principal Reynolds." All 3 immediately looked uncomfortable. The audience noticed. So did the reporters. Dr. Carson slowly turned toward the faculty section. "Is that true?" Nobody answered right away. Finally, assistant principal Reynolds adjusted his tie. "He approached us with concerns," he admitted. But the information seemed unrealistic. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Not because he was embarrassed. Because he had expected that answer. "That is when I started collecting more evidence," he said quietly. Amara felt her chest tighten. For months her son had been carrying this burden alone. While other children worried about homework and soccer practice, Ethan had been trying to prove something no adult was willing to examine. A reporter near the aisle suddenly raised her hand. "Has Sterling Foundation been notified?" The question landed heavily across the room. Nobody from the board answered. Nobody from the administration answered. The silence itself became an answer. Ethan looked toward the giant screen one more time. The name remained there, bright against the dark background. Sterling Foundation. The same name that had reshaped Amara's past. The same name now pulling the attention of everyone in the building. Then a school employee hurried through the side doors carrying a tablet. He moved directly toward Principal Hale and whispered something into his ear. Hale's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face. Dr. Carson noticed. "What is it?" she asked. Hale swallowed hard before answering. "Sterling Technologies just contacted the school." The room froze. "They are sending representatives." He paused. His eyes moved from the screen to Ethan. "And according to the message, Nathan Sterling himself is on the way." The reaction was immediate. Conversations erupted across the auditorium like a sudden storm rolling across open water. Parents who had planned to leave were now settling deeper into their seats. Reporters moved closer to the stage. Phones appeared everywhere. Principal Hale repeatedly asked for order, but his voice was getting lost beneath the growing noise. Nathan Sterling was coming. The announcement alone had transformed the atmosphere. For most people in the room, he was more than a billionaire. He was a symbol, a man whose story appeared in business magazines, whose speeches filled conference halls, and whose charitable foundation had funded schools across the country. To them, he was a public figure. To Amara, he was a chapter she had closed years ago, or at least she thought she had. She folded her hands together and focused on her breathing. Beside her, Ethan remained remarkably calm. He looked at the screen, then at the financial charts, then quietly closed the presentation folder on the computer. There was no excitement in his expression, no satisfaction. If anything, he looked tired. Dr. Carson noticed. "Ethan," she said gently, "how long have you been working on this?" He considered the question. "Almost every day for 2 months." "After school?" she asked. He nodded. "Mostly at night." Amara felt something twist inside her chest. She remembered the countless evenings she had walked past his bedroom and seen the faint glow of a monitor beneath the door. She had assumed he was studying mathematics or programming. She had no idea he was trying to solve a mystery that had somehow reached the highest levels of one of the most influential foundations in America. "Why did you keep going?" Dr. Carson asked. Ethan looked down briefly before answering. "Because the numbers did not make sense." A few people smiled softly. The answer sounded simple, but everyone could tell it was honest. Ethan had not started this because he wanted attention. He had started because something was wrong and he could not ignore it. Near the back of the room, another school employee rushed inside carrying a second tablet. He moved directly toward the board members. Their expressions changed almost immediately as they reviewed whatever information had arrived. Dr. Carson adjusted her glasses. "What is it now?" she asked. The employee hesitated. "National media outlets are already reporting the story." A wave of surprise moved through the audience. Reporters exchanged quick looks. Some were already receiving notifications. The story was spreading far beyond Jefferson Academy. Amara stared at the floor for a moment. Everything was moving too fast. What had begun as a hearing about her son was becoming a national headline. Then she noticed something unusual. Ethan was not looking at the crowd. He was staring at a photograph displayed on a reporter's phone. The image showed Nathan Sterling standing at a charity event several months earlier. Ethan studied the picture with quiet curiosity. His eyes narrowed slightly. The shape of the jaw, the expression, the posture. Something about the image seemed to hold his attention. Then, for reasons he could not explain, he glanced toward Amara. She noticed immediately. Their eyes met for only a second. Yet something unspoken passed between them. Before either could say a word, the auditorium doors opened once again. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward the entrance. And standing beneath the bright hallway lights was the first member of Nathan Sterling's executive team. The woman who entered first looked nothing like a celebrity or public figure. She wore a charcoal gray suit, carried a tablet beneath one arm, and moved with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to crisis. Yet the reaction she received made it clear who she represented. Conversation stopped instantly. Cameras turned. Even Principal Hale straightened his posture. The woman introduced herself as Claire Whitmore, Chief Legal Officer for Sterling Technologies. Her voice was steady, professional, and surprisingly calm considering the circumstances. "Mr. Sterling is currently en route," she said. "Until he arrives, I have been authorized to review the information presented today." Dr. Carson gestured toward the stage. "Please do." Claire approached the screen and began examining the charts Ethan had assembled. At first, her expression remained neutral. She tapped through several pages, reading quietly. Then she reached the transaction summaries. A subtle change crossed her face. Nothing dramatic, just the slightest tightening around her eyes. Ethan noticed immediately. So did Amara. Claire reviewed another page. Then another. The silence in the auditorium grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, she lowered the tablet. "Who prepared this analysis?" she asked. Everyone looked toward Ethan. For the first time since arriving, Claire appeared genuinely surprised. "You?" Ethan nodded. "With no assistance?" "I used public records, school records, and the foundation reports." Claire studied him carefully. "How old are you?" 10. A few people smiled at the simplicity of the exchange. Claire did not. She looked back at the charts again. "These transaction paths are accurate," she said quietly. "The The words hit the room like a shockwave. Reporters immediately began typing. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Principal Hale looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Dr. Carson leaned forward. Are you saying his findings are correct? Claire chose her next words carefully. I am saying the transaction paths shown here exist. The distinction mattered, but it was enough. The room erupted into whispers again. Ethan remained seated now, watching everything unfold with the same quiet focus he brought to mathematics problems. Claire continued examining the data. Then she stopped at one particular page. Her eyes narrowed. She zoomed in. Read something again. Then looked directly at Ethan. How did you find this account? She asked. Ethan stood. The transfer timing was wrong. Wrong how? Every donation moved at regular intervals except one. Claire stared at him for several seconds before slowly nodding. It was the kind of answer that only made sense to someone who understood patterns at an extraordinary level. Amara noticed something else. For the first time since entering the building, Claire Whitmore no longer looked concerned about the school's accusations against Ethan. She looked concerned about what Ethan might discover. Next, suddenly her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Whatever message appeared caused her expression to shift immediately. She looked toward the auditorium entrance. The room followed her gaze. Outside the glass doors, dark vehicles had begun arriving. Reporters rushed toward the windows. Parents rose from their seats. The energy inside the auditorium changed once again. Then Claire slipped her phone into her pocket and spoke quietly. He is here. A hush fell over the crowd. Amara felt her heartbeat quicken despite herself. 11 years of silence suddenly felt very small. The entrance doors opened. Bright afternoon lights spilled into the auditorium. And for the first time in more than a decade, Nathan Sterling walked into her world again. Nathan Sterling entered without the dramatic confidence people expected from one of the wealthiest men in America. The auditorium had already built an image of him long before he arrived. Magazine covers, interviews, charity galas, success stories repeated so often they sounded permanent. Yet the man walking through the doors looked surprisingly human beneath the bright lights. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and an expression that suggested he had come directly from somewhere important. Conversation stopped instantly. Hundreds of eyes followed him as he moved down the aisle. Cameras lifted. Phones recorded. Reporters whispered updates into microphones. Nathan barely seemed to notice any of it. His attention drifted toward the stage where financial charts still filled the giant screen. Claire Whitmore stepped beside him and quietly explained the situation. He listened without interruption. The further she spoke, the more focused he became. Then she pointed toward Ethan. Nathan looked up. The moment lasted only a second. Yet something changed. Amara saw it immediately. Nathan's expression froze almost imperceptibly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But she noticed. After all these years, she still recognized when something caught him off guard. Ethan remained seated beneath the stage lights, unaware of the storm quietly forming around him. Nathan studied him for another moment before turning his attention back to the presentation. Who assembled this? He asked. Claire answered softly. The student. Nathan glanced toward Ethan again. Alone, as far as we can tell. A faint murmur spread through the audience. Nathan slowly approached the stage. Principal Hale hurried forward and extended a hand. Nathan shook it politely but briefly. His focus remained on the charts. Dr. Carson stood and welcomed him before offering access to the presentation files. Nathan reviewed several pages in silence. Every few moments he zoomed into a transaction or examined a timeline more closely. The room watched his face, searching for clues. None appeared. Years of boardrooms and negotiations had taught him how to hide reactions. Yet one thing became obvious. He was taking Ethan's work seriously. Very seriously. Nearly 10 minutes passed before Nathan finally looked up. The analysis is impressive, he said. Reporters immediately began typing. Parents exchanged surprised looks. Ethan simply nodded. Nathan continued reviewing the records. Then he stopped at a particular chart. His eyes narrowed. He enlarged a section of the screen, examined it carefully, then enlarged it again. Claire noticed the change. What is it? She asked. Nathan pointed toward a series of transactions highlighted in blue. These transfers should not exist. The room grew quiet once more. What do you mean? Dr. Carson asked. Nathan did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Ethan. How did you find this sequence? Ethan stood. I followed the timing pattern. Nathan stared at him for several seconds. The answer clearly surprised him. Not because it was wrong, because it was exactly how an experienced forensic analyst might approach the problem. Ethan looked back without hesitation. For the first time, father and son stood facing one another without knowing the truth that connected them. Nathan eventually nodded. You found something important. A ripple moved through the audience. Ethan glanced toward his mother before returning his attention to the stage. Nathan looked back at the screen. Then, quietly enough that only the front rows heard it, he said something nobody expected. This trail does not lead to my foundation. He paused. His eyes remained fixed on the highlighted transfers. It leads to someone inside it. The statement settled over the auditorium like a sudden change in weather. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The words were too unexpected, too precise. Nathan Sterling was not defending his foundation. He was pointing somewhere deeper, somewhere closer. Reporters immediately exchanged looks. Cameras focused on the stage. Dr. Carson leaned forward. You believe someone inside the foundation is responsible? Nathan kept his eyes on the screen. I believe these transactions were designed to look invisible. He enlarged another section of the chart. Numbers filled the projection wall. Most people could not make sense of them. Ethan could. Nathan could. And for the first time, everyone in the room understood that the 10-year-old boy and the billionaire were looking at the same puzzle through remarkably similar eyes. Ethan stepped closer to the screen. The transfers repeat every 11 months, he said. Nathan nodded. Exactly. Claire Whitmore looked between them. What does that mean? Nathan pointed to a sequence highlighted in blue. It means whoever created this system wanted to avoid annual audits. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Ethan studied the chart for another moment. Then he walked to the computer and opened a file nobody had seen before. There is something else, he said. Amara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Ethan had already shaken the entire room. What else could possibly remain? The new file appeared on the screen. Unlike the financial reports, this one contained photographs. Event photographs, charity galas, scholarship ceremonies, foundation board meetings. Nathan frowned. Where did these come from? Public archives, Ethan answered. I compared attendance records to transaction dates. A murmur moved through the crowd. Ethan clicked through several images. Faces appeared and disappeared. Executives, donors, advisors. Then he stopped. One photograph remained on the screen. The image had been taken 3 years earlier during a fundraising dinner in New York City. Ethan zoomed in on a man standing near the edge of the frame. Silver hair, expensive suit, confident smile. Nathan's expression changed instantly. Claire noticed it first. You know him? Nathan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the image. Yes, he said quietly. I know him. The room waited. That is Victor Langley. The name meant nothing to most people, but it clearly meant something to Nathan. Who is he? Dr. Carson asked. Nathan slowly folded his arms. Former Chief Financial Officer of Sterling Foundation. Reporters immediately began typing again. Ethan clicked to another slide. More dates appeared. More photographs. Every major transaction coincided with an event attended by Victor Langley. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Claire stared at the evidence. This is not possible. It is possible, Ethan said softly. Because it happened. The simplicity of the answer silenced the room again. Nathan looked at Ethan. Really looked at him this time. The way the boy analyzed information. The way he noticed patterns others missed. The way he spoke only when he was certain. Something about it felt strangely familiar. Then Ethan glanced toward Amara. The movement was brief, natural, yet Nathan followed it. His eyes landed on her for the first time since entering the auditorium. The world seemed to narrow. 11 years vanished in a heartbeat. Amara felt her breath catch. Nathan did not look away. Neither did she. Confusion flickered across his face. Then recognition. Small at first. Then unmistakable. Across the stage, Ethan continued explaining the evidence, unaware that a different discovery had just begun. Nathan Sterling was no longer looking at the investigation. He was staring at the woman he had not seen in more than a decade. And for reasons he could not yet explain, he could not stop noticing how much the boy standing beside the screen suddenly looked like him. For several long seconds, Nathan Sterling forgot about the reporters, the school board, and the financial investigation unfolding around him. His attention remained fixed on Amara. The auditorium seemed smaller somehow. Quieter. The years between them no longer felt like a decade. They felt like a question that had never been answered. Across the stage, Ethan continued explaining transaction records with calm precision, completely unaware of the storm gathering beneath the surface. Nathan forced himself to look back at the presentation. He needed facts, numbers, something concrete. Yet every time he glanced toward the screen, his eyes drifted back to the boy. The resemblance was becoming difficult to ignore. Not just the shape of Ethan's face, not just the way he stood. It was the way he thought, the way he approached problems, the way he noticed details everyone else overlooked. Nathan knew that mindset because he had spent most of his life living inside it. Claire Whitmore leaned closer. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Nathan nodded once. "Continue reviewing the files." But his voice lacked its usual certainty. On stage, Ethan opened another document. Victor Langley controlled approval authority on every flagged transaction, he explained. Nobody else appears consistently enough to match the pattern. Reporters typed furiously. Board members whispered among themselves. Dr. Carson studied the evidence with growing concern. "Can this be verified?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I included source references for every record." The room grew silent again. Everything he presented held up under scrutiny. Every question produced another answer. Every challenge revealed more evidence. Nathan watched carefully. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan pushed his glasses up slightly and turned toward the audience while explaining a sequence of dates. The movement was simple, ordinary, yet it struck Nathan with surprising force. He had seen that exact gesture before, thousands of times, in mirrors, in photographs, in old video recordings from his 20s. His pulse quickened. Nathan immediately dismissed the thought. Coincidence, he told himself. It had to be. Yet the feeling refused to disappear. Meanwhile, Amara sat perfectly still. She could see the questions forming behind Nathan's eyes. She recognized them because she had imagined this moment countless times years ago. Back when Ethan was born. Back when she still believed Nathan might somehow learn the truth. But life had moved on. She had moved on. At least she thought she had. Dr. Carson suddenly interrupted the presentation. "Mrs. Brooks." Every head turned toward Amara. She blinked. "Yes. Did you know your son was conducting this investigation?" Amara smiled faintly. "I knew he was researching something important." A few parents laughed softly. Dr. Carson smiled as well. "You seem remarkably calm considering everything happening today." Amara glanced at Ethan. Pride softened her expression. "My son has spent 10 years proving people wrong. At some point, you stop being surprised." The audience responded with quiet approval. Nathan heard every word. And for reasons he could not fully explain, those words affected him more than the financial evidence. 10 years. The number echoed in his mind. 10 years. Ethan was 10 years old. The realization landed gently at first. Then all at once, Nathan slowly turned toward the boy again. His eyes moved from Ethan to Amara and back again. The math was simple, uncomfortably simple. And for the first time that afternoon, Nathan Sterling stopped wondering whether the boy looked familiar. He started wondering why nobody had ever told him he existed. The realization refused to leave Nathan's mind. Even as the presentation continued, even as reporters filled the auditorium with the constant glow of phone screens and flashing notifications, his attention kept returning to the same impossible question. 10 years old. Ethan was 10 years old. Nathan felt as though he were standing inside two moments at once. One was the crowded auditorium around him. The other was a rainy evening more than a decade earlier when he had walked away from the life he thought he could return to later. He had spent years convincing himself that chapter was closed. Now it was sitting a few feet away, wearing glasses and explaining forensic accounting better than many professionals. Across the stage, Ethan opened another folder. "There is one final pattern," he said. The room immediately quieted. Everyone had learned by now that whenever Ethan spoke, something important followed. The screen changed again. This time, instead of financial records, a series of communication. Logs appeared. Emails. Meeting schedules. Approval requests. Claire Whitmore leaned forward. "Where did those come from?" Ethan pointed to the references listed beneath the files. Public disclosures and archived board records. Nathan stared at the screen. The information was accurate. Disturbingly accurate. Ethan highlighted several entries connected to Victor Langley. Then he drew a line across the timeline. The transactions increased whenever audits were delayed, he explained. And the delays always happened after communication from the same office. Dr. Carson narrowed her eyes. Which office? Ethan clicked one final time. A name appeared. Not Victor Langley's. Another one. Older. More powerful. The room fell silent. Nathan felt his stomach tighten. He recognized it immediately. Charles Sterling. His father. The founder of the original family trust. The man who had controlled every major financial decision during the early years of the company. Reporters stopped typing. Board members stared at the screen. Even Claire looked stunned. That cannot be right, she whispered. Ethan remained calm. I thought that too. He opened another document. That is why I checked again. More records appeared. More dates. More approvals. The evidence pointed in the same direction every time. Nathan felt memories surfacing that he had not revisited in years. His father screening phone calls. His father controlling access to investors. His father insisting that personal relationships were distractions during the company's early growth. Back then, Nathan had viewed it as tough business advice. Now old conversations sounded different. Sharper. Stranger. Amara watched the change unfolding across his face. She recognized it immediately. It was the expression of someone discovering that the story they believed for years might not be true. Then Ethan said something that made the entire room stop breathing. There is another reason I think these records matter. He looked toward Nathan, then toward Amara. Because there are missing communications too. Nathan's pulse quickened. Ethan opened a final archive. Hundreds of records filled the screen. Most were routine. Then a filtered search result appeared. Undelivered messages. Blocked correspondence. Forwarded requests that never reached their destination. Nathan stood completely still. The names attached to the records appeared one after another. And there, buried among years of archived data, was a name he had not expected to see. Amara Brooks. The auditorium vanished into silence as Nathan stared at the screen. 11 years earlier, he had believed she stopped writing. The records suggested something very different. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Hundreds of people sat motionless beneath the bright auditorium lights, staring at the screen as years of hidden records slowly revealed a different version of the past. Nathan did not blink. His eyes remained fixed on the archived communications. Message after message appeared in chronological order. Letters forwarded through company offices. Emails redirected to inactive accounts. Requests marked as reviewed but never delivered. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Amara watched him carefully. For the first time all afternoon, she saw something she had never associated with Nathan Sterling. Regret. Not the regret of losing money or making a poor business decision. Something deeper. More personal. Claire Whitmore continued reviewing the records. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. These files were intentionally archived, she said quietly. Someone did not want them discovered. Ethan nodded. That is why it took so long. The room remained silent. Every person present understood they were witnessing more than a financial investigation now. They were watching buried truths surface one piece at a time. Ethan opened the final report he had prepared. The missing scholarship money and the communication records intersect here. He highlighted a timeline connecting Victor Langley to the unauthorized transfers and Charles Sterling to the blocked correspondence. The transactions created financial opportunities. The communication blocks removed oversight. Dr. Carson stared at the screen. You are saying these were connected? Ethan nodded. I think they protected each other. Reporters immediately resumed typing. The story was growing larger by the minute. Nathan slowly sat down for the first time since arriving. He looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. 11 years of assumptions were collapsing around him. Then Ethan surprised everyone. He clicked to one final slide. The screen filled with charts and calculations. There is something important, he said. The foundation itself is not responsible. Claire looked up sharply. Explain. Ethan pointed toward the records. Most scholarship funds reach students exactly as intended. The missing transactions represent a small percentage of total operations. He highlighted several figures. The foundation helped thousands of students. The fraud happened inside the system, not because of the system. Nathan looked at him carefully. Ethan had every opportunity to destroy the organization publicly. Instead, he was protecting the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. The distinction mattered. Claire slowly nodded. He is right. The admission echoed through the room. The evidence supports that conclusion. Relief moved across several faces. Not because the problem disappeared, but because the truth had become clearer. Victor Langley was responsible for the financial scheme. The foundation had been used, not created, for wrongdoing. Ethan had not exposed a villain. He had exposed the actual one. Nathan stared at the boy in silence. The same boy the school wanted expelled only hours earlier had just saved the reputation of an organization serving thousands of families. More importantly, he had done it without seeking recognition. Amara felt pride swell quietly inside her chest. Ethan had always been different. Not because of his intelligence, because of his character. Then Ethan closed the presentation and stepped away from the computer. The giant screen faded to black. The room remained silent. For a moment, nobody knew what to say. Then one parent stood and began applauding. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The sound filled the room like a wave. Ethan looked surprised, embarrassed even. He glanced toward his mother, uncertain what to do. Amara smiled softly. Across the room, Nathan Sterling remained standing beside his chair, unable to take his eyes off the son he was only beginning to realize had been in front of him all along. The applause seemed to last forever. Ethan stood beneath the auditorium lights, uncertain where to look as hundreds of people remained on their feet. Just a few hours earlier, many of those same people had accepted the idea that he should be removed from the school. Now they were applauding the boy who had protected scholarship funds, exposed corruption, and revealed truths that adults had overlooked for years. Eventually, the applause softened. People returned to their seats. The room settled into a quiet unlike any that had existed before. Dr. Carson rose slowly from her chair. Her voice carried clearly across the auditorium. The recommendation for expulsion is officially withdrawn. A wave of relief moved through the audience. Amara closed her eyes briefly. She had spent years fighting battles no one else saw. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. Dr. Carson continued. In addition, the board will establish a new academic research initiative for exceptional students who demonstrate extraordinary analytical ability. She smiled toward Ethan. And we would be honored if Ethan Brooks became its first student ambassador. The audience applauded again. Ethan looked toward his mother. Amara nodded softly. Pride shined in her eyes. Then something unexpected happened. Nathan stepped forward. The room immediately quieted. No cameras flashed. No reporters interrupted. Everyone sensed this moment was different. Nathan stood a few feet away from Amara and Ethan. For a second, the billionaire seemed unable to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. I came here today expecting to review financial records. His voice was calm but unmistakably emotional. Instead, I discovered that the most important truth in this room had nothing to do with money. Silence filled the auditorium. Nathan looked directly at Amara. I believed you stopped reaching out. His voice softened. I was wrong. Amara held his gaze. There was no anger in her expression, no triumph, only the quiet dignity that had carried her through 11 difficult years. Nathan nodded slowly, accepting the weight of what he had learned. Then he turned toward Ethan. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The resemblance was impossible to miss now, not just in appearance, in the way they observed the world, in the way they searched for answers. Nathan took a slow breath. There are years I cannot get back, he said, and I will never pretend otherwise. The room remained completely silent. But if you ever decide you want to know me, I would be grateful for that opportunity. Ethan listened carefully. Like always, he considered the facts before responding. Then he glanced toward his mother. Amara offered no instructions, no pressure. The decision belonged to him. Ethan looked back at Nathan. I think people should be judged by what they do next. A few parents wiped tears from their eyes. Nathan smiled for the first time that afternoon. It was not the smile of a billionaire giving a speech. It was the smile of a man receiving a chance he never expected. Outside, evening sunlight streamed through the auditorium windows, painting the room in gold. The investigation would continue. The missing funds would be recovered. The people responsible would face accountability. But those victories no longer felt like the heart of the story. The real victory sat quietly between a mother who never gave up, a boy who followed the truth wherever it led, and a man finally willing to face the consequences of a past he never fully understood. As families slowly began leaving their seats, Ethan gathered his notes and closed his laptop. The same school that had once tried to remove him now watched him with admiration. Yet nothing about him had changed. He was still the same curious boy who noticed patterns others missed. The difference was that the world had finally stopped long enough to listen.